Well, I asked for another one. I need to give him time to do it, don't I, right? We're in our series in Romans chapter 12, and I'm enjoying this. I don't know if you are, just taking a little short verse and looking what it has to say. I'm enjoying it because it's a really practical section, right? So he had talked about earlier in Romans chapter 12 about giftedness and what is your gift and trying to use your gift. And if you have, like I have, looked into that a little bit. Number one, trying to decide what is your spiritual gift. What did God uniquely design you to do? What are those kinds of works that God would have for you to do? And then trying to figure out, okay, now that I've figured out, I think I know what my gift is, now how do I use that? How do I go out there and find opportunity to do that? And so all that is, I won't say an abstraction, but a little harder to come by. In this section, it's pretty forthright. Don't have to work real hard at trying to figure out this section. Now, that's true and not true, because situations will come and I'll have to make decisions. But we're going to just look for a little bit, and I won't take much of your time because there's not a lot of us here, right? I don't know why that makes sense. If there's just a few of us here, it ought to be a short sermon. If there's a bunch of us here, I guess there needs to be a long sermon. Y'all bring somebody Sunday. All right. Contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. That would be a pretty good memory verse if we were still doing those things like we were when I was a child. Wouldn't be a real long one to memorize, right? So you probably do that one. But I want us to talk about these two ideas that are here. It's interesting. This word contribute here is the word, or a form of the word, koinonia, which is often translated fellowship, those kinds of things. It means to share one's possessions with the implication of some kind of joint participation and mutual interest. It's the idea of sharing. It really could be sharing the needs of the saints. There's a reciprocal idea there that's really interesting. What is this reciprocal idea? What is this idea of fellowship? What is this? And that's the word that's here. So I think it's rightly translated in as much as it says for us to contribute to the needs, but it also leaves us a little bit at a loss. Because I think that the idea is that here's a brother or sister that's in need, and they need my help. If I have the means to help them and they have the need, then God expects me to help them, to financially help them along if they have need. That's the idea. But it helps me too. And that idea of fellowship, that idea of a reciprocal nature of this deal is they're giving me the opportunity to share what the Lord has blessed me with. And, you get into all kinds of situations, right? I think the benevolence of the church may be one of the most difficult parts of it. I don't know if you've ever participated on the church level with the church coffers in mind. People come and they ask for help. And it's one of the most difficult things. I was dark-headed when I started helping with some of that, right? So was Doyle, I believe. But we have an obligation. But here it says for us to have this fellowship, to contribute to the needs of the saints. The word need here is a word that means to lack. It's pretty much what it means. I won't bore you, but it's this idea that there's something lacking. They're having something lacking. And then the word I want to kind of key in on for a minute is this idea of contribute to the needs of the saints. And that's an interesting word, pertaining to being holy in the sense of moral qualities, in possession of certain essentially divine qualities in contrast with what is human, to be holy, pure, divine. So this word hagios is the word, be holy for your Father is holy. It's the holy word, but here it's translated as saints, right? It's that same class of word, same word that means to be holy. And that's interesting. So it could be translated fellowship with the needs of the holy ones. And it's actually a participle, so it'd be fellowshipping. And if we want to get real technical the way it is, the needs of the holy ones sharing is really the way that it reads. Let me read you a few verses that I think tie into this. In Galatians chapter 6 and verse 6, it says, "Let the one who is taught the word share all good things with the one who teaches." And so in the context, you got a preacher who's bringing the gospel, whether this is an apostle, whether this is an elder, whether this is an evangelist. Somebody is doing the work of sharing with you spiritual wealth. And the admonition in Galatians 6 is support that person. Let the one who is taught the word share all good things with the one who teaches. And so there's that biblical idea of someone sharing spiritually, someone sharing monetarily, and that is by design. In 2 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 3 and 4, "For they gave according to their means, as I can testify, and beyond their means, of their own accord, begging us earnestly for the favor," this one says, "of taking part in the relief of the saints." And so as Paul was going around preaching, as he's going on his missionary journeys, there was a great famine in Judea. And as he was going and was preaching the gospel and bringing salvation to these Gentile nations, or Gentile cities, which were in nations, but he goes to Corinth and he shares with them the eternal gospel. And they're coming to Christ, their souls are being saved, and yet at the same time, he says, there's a need. You've got brothers whom you've never met back in Jerusalem and in Judea who are starving to death. Would you give something? In this case, he's saying, look, these brethren about which he's talking about, were begging him for the opportunity to share in this, to have a sharing, to have a fellowship in this. And I think that that's an interesting verse for us to look at. NIV reads this way on that verse. It says, "For I testify that they gave as much as they were able, and even beyond their ability, entirely on their own. They urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people." And so I don't know how we look at needs when they come. But here Paul tells us, contribute to the needs of the saints. And a lot that could be said. Probably should have spent a little time talking about this idea of being saints. I will say this much, is when it talks about our sainthood or our holiness, it's a two-edged sword, or it's a two-faced coin, right? So who was I before Christ? Well, I was an enemy. I was lost. I was ugly. There's nothing good going on in and of myself. But God, through the blood of Jesus, made me holy. And I stand before God as pure as the blood of Christ, as holy as the blood of Christ. At the same time, He not only made me holy, He gave me that title of being saints. And He says, now since I've made you holy, now I want you to be in your actions holy. And so I'm not sure how you factor that in. Do I filter my sharing and needs with one who's, living the way they should? I don't know. I have an obligation to everyone, right? Especially to the household of the saints. And so we'll have to make difficult decisions if we're tending to the needs of the saints. And so he says, contribute to the needs of the saints and seek to show hospitality. And this word that's translated here in this translation, to seek, means to do something with intense effort and with a definite purpose or goal. To do with effort, to strive toward. And that's an interesting idea here. So here's this idea, we're to seek to be hospitable. We're to be determined. We're to be striving toward. Having a definite purpose toward being hospitable. And I know our world has changed, and I know our society has changed. But it's interesting that I don't think we're in one another's homes near like we used to be. Not near. I was telling somebody the other day, making fun of me playing with this karaoke app and everything. I said when I was a kid, we didn't have fancy phones. You couldn't do karaoke on your phone, whatever. But we had singings at our house. I mean, that's kind of what we did a lot. Gathered some families of the church together, and we just got together and ate and sang, and it was a normal activity for us. And so he says here for us to seek to show hospitality. And so this word translated as to show hospitality can have either, it's reflexive as well, right? So it can either refer to the showing of hospitality or it can refer to the receiving of hospitality. And so I need to show hospitality to strangers. And that becomes a really interesting thing. Let's just talk a little bit about. Raise your hand if you think the world has changed in your lifetime. Society's a little different. Well, do you think that the world has changed any since the time Paul wrote these words? They were in a different culture and things were different, right? And so we got to filter all that through our culture, but we still have, these are still commands, right? It's still what we need to do. And so it's interesting. If I lived in that era, you didn't drive into town or ride into town. I guess you didn't drive anything. You drive your donkey, I guess. But you came into town, there weren't flashing signs saying, "Eat at Joe's." There wasn't a McDonald's with a big board flashing pictures of hamburgers and cookies and stuff on the picture board out there. There were not many things that we would recognize as restaurants, right? There were public markets. There wasn't a giant grocery store, but there were little pockets scattered about a bigger city of small little markets, more like a farmer's market or something, right? These little markets. And can you imagine being a traveler and you're traveling from one place to another? Maybe this is your destination. Maybe you've been traveling for days and you come into town. There's not really a restaurant to go eat at. There's not really a place to go and eat a prepared meal. There's little markets that you could go to, but now you've got to purchase something that you could fix or buy something that's at least already in a form. Maybe there's street vendor type foods, maybe something like that. Grab a little something. And very few places had inns. How would you like to travel in those days? That along your journey, there's no place to stop and eat. When you get there, you're going to be lucky if you can find an inn, a hotel of some sort to check into. There's no restaurants. There may be a little market, and hopefully you've carried enough things with you. You could have the things you needed to fix a little something. And so it was a common thing in the Jewish society because it was a part of the law of Moses, and I should have looked up the verses, but they were commanded to be hospitable and to do those things. And so there wasn't as big of a need for restaurants and hotels and things because it was a part of the culture. It's what you did. You had the opportunity to put someone up and to feed them and to give them lodging. It's not a part of our culture, but it should be a part of our church culture. I think it's also interesting, as we look at this little short verse, we're to give to the needs of the saints and show hospitality, presumably, to strangers here. Now, that word stranger is a little strong, our English word stranger, for what's here. So what it's saying is you need to show hospitality to those people who are not in your inner circle. Not your family, the people who live there, your close family, not your close friends, those kinds of things. For all the people who are outside of your inner circle. So I'm going to guess the folks that you're real close to at church, he's not talking about that either. But what about the visiting preacher? What about somebody else who had a lot of family came in and they've got more family that came in than they can put up, and you don't know these people, but you know their family. These weren't all strangers in the sense of somebody just walked in town, I don't know anything about them. Very often, stranger in this context was somebody just not a part of their normal sphere. And so sometimes it was an absolute stranger, but sometimes it was someone they had some connection to but it was considered showing hospitality. Well, I'm going to back up about 3 steps off of that and just say this. Wouldn't it be good if we got back to just hosting something at our house? Having a meal, inviting a few people over. Have a singing. Have something. Gather the saints together. I think that would be good. But the context here really is that idea of showing hospitality to somebody who doesn't have what they need. Whether it's a church member that's in financial need and I give financially, whether it's a stranger that has no place to stay and I make sure that they have lodging. Well, that's what this verse is really all about. I want to close by reading the verse in 4 different translations. I'm kind of enjoying the series, but I'm kind of enjoying looking at these different translations and seeing how they did. Young's literal translation says this, to the necessities of the saints communicating. Well, that doesn't communicate to me, right? So instead of the word fellowship or the word sharing, it has the word communicating. I want to insert the word sharing there. To the necessities of the saints, sharing. To hospitality, pursuing. I really like the last part of that. Pursuing hospitality. The New Living Translation reads this way, when God's people are in need, be ready to help them. Always be eager to practice hospitality. I think that gets pretty close. I thought I'd take a chance on the message again, see what it said. Help needy Christians, be inventive in hospitality. That's pretty interesting. This idea of seeking and stuff, he translates it as being inventive. Maybe my favorite one was the contemporary English version reads this way, take care of God's needy people and welcome strangers into your home. Well, I think that pretty well sums up what Paul had to say right there. And though sometimes those are very difficult things to try to decide in a moment, what do we do? Those are the expectations that God has for us, to take care of our own and to take care of those who are not our own. I believe that's what that verse is really all about. Oh, by the way, I'm preaching to me too, right? Preaching to me too. Well, I think that that's very interesting, and hopefully it becomes something that's really, not that we don't do some of that. I'm looking at faces and situations, and I know people who are very hospitable, very giving. I'm not fussing at us like we don't do any of that. But I believe there is room for us to grow. I really don't know what all's going on in your lives. I'm looking and know some about some of you and not much about some others. And I don't know. I wish in some ways we did church different. I wish we really knew what was going on in one another's lives. And instead of singing a song and having you march down this aisle, I wish we were having conversations that are real and genuine about the everyday struggles that we have in Christ. Maybe sometime we'll figure out a better way to do things when we meet, where we can have genuine conversations that are more than politics or football games or whatever we might talk about, but how we're really doing. But right now what we have is an invitation song. And if there's something really on your heart, something that we can pray with you about, some way we can serve you, we do want to do that. And so if you have a need, would you come?